I'm very excited because our brother Damani, and Damani works really diligently within our community. He puts on concerts, and if you need help with any activity that you're doing, you're putting on something for the church, Damani's always there. And he was with us for Black Knowledge Matters, and he had some really good information to present to us today. And so I'm glad to get him on the schedule. And without further ado, here's our brother Damani. Go ahead, brother Damani.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone. Namaste. That's a Sanskrit word for the divine in me honors acknowledges the divine in you.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Okay, I'm gonna explain today's format, and I'm gonna talk about 5 minutes, including the format. Okay, I'm gonna speak about 5 minutes, and we're gonna show first of three clips of Dr. Marimba Ani, who was Dr. Dr. Donald Richards back then. These clips are over 35 years old. Anyway, the three clips we're gonna show, three YouTube clips are a total of 58 minutes, 58.5 minutes. The first one is 32 minutes long. Is Let the Circle Be Unbroken. She's talking about ancestral community. She's with the she's with Brother Lesterville Middleton's show on a show called For the People back in the 80s and 90s. The second clip is 19 and a half minutes long. It's a powerful clip. And the third clip is only 6 minutes long. Why I'm passionate about this subject, and this format would allow about between YouTube clips, we can have like 35, it allows 35 minutes, 35 minutes of discussion, maybe 10 minutes of discussion or 15 between clips. Okay, why I'm passionate about this subject. On page 50 of the Hosea, it said number 2, in the book of Kahidi, it said, follow in the footsteps of your ancestors, for the mind is trained through knowledge. Behold their words, endure in books. Open and read them, and follow their wise counsel. It goes on, but I'll stop right there. Okay. I pour libations like 3 times a week at my place. I pour libations 3 times a week. I have an ancestral shrine behind me with pictures of the ancestors, obituaries of the ancestors, and I commune with the ancestors every day. And sometimes I had to get out of my car and run back in the house. I didn't do the rituals before I left, the spiritual rituals I do before I left, so I can center myself. And then around my house and around your homes, if you really look at it, our homes are like ancestral shrines. I got pictures of the ancestors all over the place, artifacts of ancient Africa, and Malcolm X looking at me right now on the hallway wall. And what happens, and through ancestral communion, the ancestors start infusing my thoughts. They start infusing my thought life, and with honest and reverence for the ancestors. Okay, number 7 here. Dr. Marimba Ani is formerly Dr. Adana Richards. She is a prodigy of Dr. John Henry Clark. He brought on as a professor at Hunter College in New York. As a professor in African and Puerto Rican studies. She's an anthropologist. She's an activist scholar. She is an African-centered cultural scientist. We can name ourselves. We can, people say, well, who gave you that title? White people don't have to give us no title. We can claim our own titles. Like Brother Anthony Brody, he calls himself a cultural memory specialist. And this is all important. And so, I wanted to choose a woman scholar because she's have a very spiritual aura. She brings that feminine energy in. She brings that spiritual energy in that sometimes the male scholars just speak to the left hemisphere of the brain, where Marimba Ani speaks to both hemispheres of the brain. She's the author of 2 books, Let the Circle Be Unbroken. Let the Circle Be Unbroken. As I'm holding it upside look like I'm holding it upside down in my camera. Anyway, Let the Circle Be Unbroken. She signed my book for me in January 22nd, 1993. I was at Crampton Auditorium in Washington, D.C. at Howard University. Anthony Broder had an ASCOT conference. All the scholars were there. They was raising money for Lesterville, Middleton. Anyway, she wrote to my brother Harry. I was Harry back then. The ancestors have blessed you, for you have been born African. Study, organize, and build African institutions. Donna Marimba Richards, January 22nd, 1993. And this one of the plaques, I read over my ancestral altar. I read this every day, several times a day. It said, "Oh, great ancestors, we humbly look to you for guidance and light. To you who have earned your reverence, please walk with us down the winding road of life. To you who have already passed, we honor you and we love you. Oh, great ancestors, please hear us when we call. Oh, great ancestors, please show us your signs and let them be for us a guiding light." Yeah, I read that over there. It goes on the wall above my ancestral altar. One thing about Wozzeck Community Church, we honor the ancestors every week, pouring libations and everything we do. We are honoring the ancestors. We have Mama Jasiri Day. We have historical tributes every week, and our services are infused with honor for the ancestors. But what I think, what I'm realizing is we have an unutilized strength. Dr. Marimba Ani, on the second segment of the second YouTube clip, she would talk about that. She don't think we take this subject with enough seriousness. So I think we have an unutilized strength. I think after viewing these YouTube clips, you would agree with me. Okay, one more quick thing. One thing that Ancestral Communion does, it places the relationship between a person and her community, his or her community and family, into a sacred context. She's going to talk about it. Places into a sacred context. The family, community, and emotion and unity in a Wozzeck affirmation. We say, creators, help us to remember the humanity, glory, and suffering of our ancestors. That's part of Ancestral Communion. So it places the family, the community, nation, and race into a spiritual context. A sacred context is what Ancestral Communion does. The community and culture is perceived as being sacred in origin. And, real fast, I want everybody to imagine concentric circles, 5 concentric circles. They're all joining each other. On the outside and larger circle is the life force, the creative life force energy of the universe. You can call it God, or you can call it the Orishas, or the Vudan, or the Abasun, and the tree language, and from the Khan people. And the next circle, which all these circles are linked together. And the next circle is the ancestors. The ancestors are closer to the source. They are closest to the source. The next circle is the elders. 65 and over, the elders. We are closer to the ancestors, literally and figuratively. And the next circle is the adults, 25 to 64. I'm going on 64 next month, me and my twin brother. And the next circle is the children, the young people and the children, teenagers and the children. And all this is placed into a sacred context. Ancestral communion is the source of our strength and our power. She will explain. Dr. Marimba will explain. And for African people, the most important reality is a spiritual reality. Dr. Marimba will explain that also. We've been systematically despiritualized. She will explain that also. One more thing, when European anthropologists went into Africa and other places, they saw a communal system that was spiritual in nature, matriarchal in nature. They came, the European anthropologists, they knew more than we did that the source of our strength and our power was ancestral communion. And the Catholic priests sought out to, she's going to explain how Christianity was imposed on us. And the Catholic priests went in, they used 5 words to describe everything in African culture, everything in African culture. Use the word demonic. I call it DPHPS. All our spiritual practice, they said they were demonic. They were pagan. They was heathen. They was polytheistic. Or they were satanic. Those words only refer to African spiritual practices and things in African traditional religion. One more thing. Well, Dr. Hillard said our problem is a loss of a sense of peoplehood, pure and simple. In his book, The Maroon Within Us, our master teacher, Dr. Hillard, said our problem is a loss of a sense of peoplehood, pure and simple. And so with that, I'd like to start. Minister Imhotep going to show the first clip. It's 33 minutes. It's about 32 minutes long. And so we can get started, Minister Imhotep.
All right, thank you. Is there anything that someone would like to say before we begin those videos? Is there anyone that would like to say something? Give you a chance. All right. Thank you for the introduction, Brother. Oh, somebody? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, she's a powerful woman.
Yes.
And the other book that you mentioned, Urugo, also. There you go.
Also, brother, are you from DC?
No, I'm from Portsmouth, Virginia. Portsmouth. I spent a lot of time going back to DC. I got to get my ticket. I'm going back to DC area, Maryland, DC, and Baltimore area, August 1st for a family reunion. No, I'm from Portsmouth, Virginia, Tidewater area.
Okay. Well, October 18th is Howard's homecoming, for your information.
Okay. My sister graduated from Howard, Darlene. Yeah.
Right.
All right.
All right, let's get started. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to For the People. We're at the B.F. Randolph Cemetery in Columbia, South Carolina, where many of the African-American legislators of the Reconstruction era were laid to rest. In this series of programs, we'll examine, among other things, African spirituality and the African concept of death. Our guest is anthropologist Dr. Donna M. Richards, author of Let the Circle Be Unbroken: The Implications of African Spirituality in the Diaspora. Dr. Richards is an associate professor in the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College in New York City. How does the African concept of God differ from the African American concept of God? Tough question, but...
Well, no, it's only tough because you said African American. There's a term I have difficulty using because I almost find that a contradiction in terms. Okay, and I don't have problems saying that Africa is wherever we are born. That there is Africa reborn in us. Okay, so that the contrast is really between the African concept and the European concept. for me, okay? And even when we, as Africans in the diaspora, think that we are responding, you see, or try to respond to a European concept, our Africanness comes through.
Or try to accept the European,
Okay? The African concept is of a force, a universal life force, which unites everything in the universe. That is, all phenomenon, all being in the universe, which flows through everything, which gives meaning to everything. It's a source of spirit, of truth, of meaning. So that when we talk about the various Orisha, some people have called them gods, I call them forces, or the Vodun, for instance, the Abasson in Twi language. We're really talking about aspects of this force as it manifests itself in the world so that we can understand it. So that you might talk about Shango, who you associate with thunder and lightning. Ogun, who comes to us through the knowledge of tools and brings the knowledge of agriculture and so forth. And I could go on and on and on, but really these all come together in one universal force. So that the concept of God, as it is related to in the European experience,
which is?
Seems to be that people get locked into the personification of a concept.
What do you mean?
Rather than the significance of it, so that you have this vision in your mind of this man somewhere who is up there, I guess, who is pulling all the strings, manipulating everything. But when you really think about it, there must be a deeper concept than that. You're talking about something deeper than that. And the African conception, you see, is much more complex, much more profound, because, of course, the first spiritual concepts come out of Africa. So that you're dealing with something which is much deeper. But when people generally go to church, they aren't questioning and thinking about the complexity of what is this spiritual thing that I'm dealing with, you see. So they just accept these images. And in the European image, you have this concept of a God with a capital G, and that comes off as some kind of super person. The African concept is much more dealing with nature, dealing with metaphysical realities, dealing with the forces that interact and on our lives. And that's why your mother would say a prayer when she's planting a flower or doing her work, because she understands this as energy, as an energy source. Now, she might not consciously articulate
on
that.
Intellectual level.
Right. She doesn't have to do that. But our people have always lived that for us, you're talking about energy. And you're talking about something which is very sacred and something very special.
Now, what is ancestral communion? And how does it differ in meaning from ancestral worship?
Well, I don't use the word ancestor worship because I think that it was used mistakenly by mainly European anthropologists who came into Africa and other areas trying to explain something which they had no basis for understanding. And so they simplistically reduced it to talking about worshiping the dead. Ancestor communion it's much deeper than that. First of all, and to answer this now, I have to get very deep. Has to do with a whole different way of understanding the universe. It has to do with a whole different philosophical concept of time, for instance, where in the European worldview, you have a lineal conception of past, present, and future, And those are separated and distinguished from each other. And you can't really, if you're in one, you don't have access to the other. So we're in the present, we can't deal with the future, and we can't communicate with the past, okay? So what they saw was the dead, and they saw the living trying to talk to the dead, and then they talked about worshiping the dead. In the African conception, you have a concept of time which is sacred. It is cyclical. It therefore transcends those lineal categories of past, present, and future. We get beyond those. We're not dealing with those anymore. We're dealing with a reality which makes everything one. Everything is a whole. And that's what happens in the most sacred concepts of African people.
Even time.
Even time. Okay, and that's what happens in our rituals. You see, we are able to experience another kind of time frame where everything is one, everything is together. Now, if that were true, then it would be no problem in you communicating with your ancestors, because you're all together. So that's one aspect of the concept of ancestor communion, all right? Now, why is it important to have this communication? Because for the African, to get strength, you have to be whole. And the most important thing is the community. And the community is made up of, some say, the dead, the living, and the yet unborn. Most properly speaking, you can't even use the term dead, you see. But
Because?
okay, you can't use the term dead because in terms of spiritual realities, which are the most important for us, when one physically dies, one is not dead totally. In fact, a very important part of your existence, a very important stage in your development as a human being is as an ancestor. Throughout your life, you continue to grow, you continue to develop, you continue to get wiser, okay, because you know more, you learn more about the culture, you learn more about your traditions, and also you're getting closer to that thing we talked about before, the source, okay? But whatever that source of power is, you're getting closer, so you're getting smarter in a sense, you're getting wiser. So when you become an elder, you are wise, you are also more spiritual. But then when you die physically, you just cross over into another stage of your existence.
Now, let me ask you this.
Okay.
Now, hold your point, hold your point. If Africans believed that before the Europeans went into Africa,
Right.
that is that death represents only another stage
Right.
in this cycle or whatever, what did Christianity present that was new
All right.
in that regard?
Okay. One of the things that you will find that the church is most resistant to is you're talking about the spirits of the ancestors, okay? Talking about relating to them and them being a spiritual force that has power to affect your life. Now, see, I believe that we've got to take these spiritual concepts and see the political implications in them. And that's what we haven't done on a conscious level. Ancestor communion has tremendous political implications for the national consciousness of African people, because it says that that's where your strength is, and it's something that unites us as a people. Now, when I look at religion, see, I look at it politically. We were given, in quotes, this religion, or this religion, Christianity, was imposed on us for political purposes. It was imposed on us to rob us of the strength that our culture could give us. It was imposed on us when we were here to convince us that we were supposed to be enslaved, so that we would accept the definition of slave as opposed to African, slave as opposed to human being. Because actually slavery is a matter of consciousness. I mean, you're not a slave unless somebody convinces you that you're a slave and you act like a slave. You can be enslaved, you know, but I have to make myself a slave. And that's what they wanted to have happen, okay? Now, in that process, if that religion is going to be used to do that, then they are going to have to demean the practices which would unite us with our source of power, which indeed were the practices of ancestor communion. So that what they would preach is that in believing in those things, you were being heathen, you were being pagan, those were superstitions, and you were being uncivilized. And if you want to be civilized, then take this civilized religion, you see, which was universally civilized for all people, when actually what they were preaching was a statement of European nationalism, something which would uphold the system that they were, with which they were trying to control us. So that the relationship is that all those things that had to do with African practices, that had to do with the ancestors, had to, in our minds, we had to think of them as being negative, as being the things that got in our way, you know, of being saved, of being civilized, and so forth. And that's how Christianity related to practices of ancestor communion. But I'm saying that it related in this way because of the political uses of the religion, you see, that it would be threatened by our relating to our ancestors, and that Europeans knew that more than we knew that.
Now, how would relating to our ancestors strengthen us and serve as a threat to the European power?
Okay, that's what I was trying to get to before.
Okay, we're going to it now.
Which is that in the African concept, communalism is strength. That is the coming together of the family, of the group. We don't get strength as individuals, and our ancestors understood that. It's the collective that gives strength, and your wholeness as a person, as an African person, can only come from the wholeness of the community. So that ancestor communion, let's put it on a very day-to-day level, how it would work. We come together for a meal, the families together. We do this now. What's the first thing you have to do when you have that family meal? Let's say you have a very special time when you come together. Even if it's Christmas, which is supposed to be their holiday, right? Mm-hmm. What's the first thing that people would do for the meal?
Say grace. Pray.
All right. You try to remember, what about if you open up a bottle to pour out drinks for people? Do you ever remember anything anybody used to do with that bottle?
I'm young.
I always tell my students, I say, talk to the older people, you know? But they will remember some of these things. Yeah. Well, what about the brothers on the corner? Now, I don't know what you do down here in South Carolina, right? But in New York, there's certain things that the brothers do when they come together, when they're standing on the corner and they open up a bottle.
Well, see, I don't drink. So that... Well, go ahead.
Let me tell you, you're missing a lot of our culture, right?
Don't tell me drinking is a part of it.
But when they open up that bottle, they, off the top, they pour some of that out before everybody drinks from it. Now, what do they do that for?
Yeah,
and they will tell you, that's for the brothers who aren't here. Now, those brothers might be in jail. They might just have moved away, whatever. They say that's for the brothers who aren't here. Now, why should they have to pour off some of the drink for the brothers who aren't here? Brothers might be dead, physically. Because they're making a statement and saying that we aren't whole as a group unless they're also here. And we've got to make this statement symbolically that their spirit is among us, because their spirit being among us makes us whole. So what families would do would also be to pour off that, or they might set aside a dish or plate. Now that is giving strength to the group, and it's affirming their definition as a group. So during what I call the Ma'afa, which is our period of great disaster, which is the period of enslavement, we had to find ways to reconnect ourselves to that power source. So what we did was to recreate the rituals. Recreate the rituals so that indeed the ancestors could strengthen us. Because another thing that is happening in those rituals of ancestor communion, we call it libation, is that we are honoring them. We are remembering them. And in that way, we strengthen them. And we have to strengthen them because we are asking them to strengthen us. Okay. And in African philosophy, the principle of reciprocity is one of the most important things we can remember and live by.
Okay, now, as I was reading your book, I observed that in traditional African religion, there's communion with the collective dead. Whereas in Christianity, there is communion with a single dead, albeit resurrected. How do you see that?
Well, first of all, partly in practicing these other religions, what we're doing is honoring somebody else's ancestors. And so that they are portrayed not as Africans. I mean, even the single person that you're talking about is not portrayed as an African, but as a European. So that you are honoring somebody else's ancestor. That's number one.
Well, somebody might say, people might say, well, if this is God, then who cares what color it is?
Oh, I'm sure they would say that. And when they say it, they are not thinking politically. And for me, you have to put everything in political context. And every religion is a deification of somebody's culture.
Now, when you say deification, religion...
Sacralization of it. That is, it is making a statement that you, your people, are special and are sacred and have special reason to be. Every religion does that. And Christianity was used by Europeans to deify their culture. Okay? Well, we know that it was used to support imperialism, colonialism, enslavement, and so forth. All right? So that when we get involved in that, without that kind of understanding, what we are doing is supporting that system and deifying somebody else's culture. Now, the question of the collective, what happens in ancestor communion in terms of the African expression of that and practice of that, is that there are like levels. It gets deeper and deeper. And when someone first passes from the physical stage into the spiritual, they are remembered, how they looked, they're remembered by name, and there will be elders there to keep that memory alive, okay? Now, even then, keeping that memory alive is used to bring everybody together who was connected through that person. But then what happens after hundreds of years? That memory may be forgotten on a personal level, so that spirit no longer has a personal identity. But that doesn't mean that spirit is dead. It's never totally dead, as long as the group remembers who they are. Because what happens is that your identity as a person, as a single being, merges into the identity of the group. And you are then remembered as the group remembers who they are, as the group remembers their traditions, as the group says, we are going to consciously be African. We're going to consciously be, who we are. Now that has tremendous implications. That means that's how we keep our ancestors alive, is by remembering who we are. So if we attempt to be European, then what are we doing? We're killing our ancestors. That's very, very serious. both spiritually and politically. Now, if we kill our ancestors, in terms of the African conception, we also kill ourselves. We kill ourselves spiritually, culturally, as a people.
Now, what is the relationship between the African dead and the creator of the universe?
Okay, good question.
Okay.
What I do is, and it's hard for me to do any of this without a board because I'm always drawing pictures, but try to picture concentric circles. That always helps me. Picture the largest one as being what I call the creative principle, the source of being, the source of truth and meaning, okay? Now, you might have another word for that, and it doesn't matter what word people use, okay? Some people want to say, do you believe in God? And I want to ask them, well, what do you mean by that? You know, but we might have an African term, Olodumare, Ama, Nyame, or Nyame, and so forth. But the concept is the whole, the universe.
But as you say that, it reminds me that some people think that there is something magical about just the word, the English word, God. Have you seen that? Where, you know, as if other people around the world don't have different names.
Exactly. Exactly. But you see, that's why we have to, we're going to have to do the hard work of reconceptualizing and analyzing and understanding how words, symbols, structures, institutions are used to enslave our minds. Because that's one of the ways it happens. We get intimidated. Somebody says, do you believe in God? And we must say, oh, yeah, definitely. We don't ask them, you know, who's God or what are you talking about? We just somehow feel that in order for us to validate ourselves as human beings, then, oh, yeah, we have to say yes. But it's the concept that's behind that that's important. And all people have had concepts, you see, that were meaningful. They may not have spelled it G-O-D, and they may not have used a capital G. That's another thing. How do they write our gods, so-called gods? They have a little g. What does that mean?
What do you think
theirs have a big G, ours got a little g, and right away in your mind, because of how symbols affect us, we say we're lesser than. There's something wrong with us. And then they start talking about polytheism and how that's backward and so forth.
Polytheism, the belief in, quote, many gods.
Right, and how monotheism is supposed to be superior to us. That's a whole nother issue.
Belief in one God.
Right, but now you asked the question about how the ancestors relate to this creative force. Well, the process of life is moving towards the whole. That is, moving towards the one. You get closer and closer to that. As you get closer to that, you get more spiritual, you get wiser.
To that big circle.
Yes, to the big circle. And then there are the little ones, you see, or the smaller ones. The ancestors might be one. The Orisha would be one. Then the community comes, we come, the so-called living community, physically living. The elders, you see, and then we are the adults, and then the children. These are all links to that whole. We're all part of the whole, but each is a link to it. Each helps us to understand ourselves more as a part of that whole. And all that means is getting closer to truth. The ancestors are our link to that source because they have become closer to it.
TV.
Good evening and welcome to For the People and the second part of our conversation with anthropologist Dr. Donna Riches, author of Let the Circle Be Unbroken, The Implications of African Spirituality in the Diaspora. Now, let me try this one on you. Starting off by saying the proof is in the pudding. When you look at the African before the European, Africa before the European and Africans before the European, and how they related to each other, how they lived with each other, and look at how under traditional African religion, what we today call traditional African religion, and look at the European world and how they related to each other. What would you say in terms of qualitative difference, in terms of insofar as what the African traditional religion produced versus what the European religion produced?
Okay, suppose we focus on the definition of power. For the African, power is a power to do, power to activate, to interact, to be energized, to make things happen. And that's what African religion is all about. African spirituality it is about opening yourself up so that you can be energized by forces and balancing forces or energies which would decrease your life force. Okay? European religion is based on a conception of power as control. Power as power over other. Therefore, the religion becomes very political. That put Africans at a disadvantage when the two came into confrontation with each other, in that we never used our religion politically, but Europeans always did, so that they used it to conquer. And as you say, the proof is in the pudding. It worked for them to conquer, to enslave. And our religion was about spirituality. It was indeed about love, not hypocritically about love.
So Africans weren't going around trying to convert other people?
Never. And in fact, if you even have an African group, one group that controlled another group, or that there was any aggression against another group, very often that group who ended up doing the controlling politically would take on the religion of the other group. In other words, there was a merging, even well, culturally, obviously there would be, because they would be so close. But it seems that in one sense, we were totally unprepared for the phenomenon of the European.
Are we prepared today?
No. I mean, I don't believe we are. I believe we can be, and that certainly there are many of us who are, but as a people, there is still that. Well, there's a term that I use, but let me use the term ethos, where there is a deep kind of humanism among African people, which gets in the way of recognizing those who are enemies to your people, those who would oppress you. You see, whereas the European, even in terms of his worldview, he is created almost thinking in political terms. And by political terms, I mean where you have a group and you identify with that group and you see all other groups as the enemy, as what you're threatened by, and therefore you have to be aggressive toward. That is in the culture, that you're trained for that. You're trained to think politically, whereas we aren't. You know, Diop, Cheikh Anta Diop, our great African scholar, talked about the xenophobia, which he says was endemic to the Aryan cultures of Northern Europe. Xenophobia meaning that fear of strangers, or the fear of what is different, so that difference becomes threatening. For the African, there was almost the opposite. There was always the welcoming in of a stranger. I mean, the African said, well, this poor person is far away from home. they couldn't want to be here long. They must be going back, because who would want to be away from home? So while he's here, you know, let's feed him and just, you know, give him hospitality and so forth. Now, by the time the African realized what that stranger was about, it was too late. Because the stranger had come together with other strangers and started to build forts.
And did not want to be home.
You know, didn't want to be home because they needed what was there. Their home didn't have anything. So they needed what was, you know, what was in Africa.
You have talked and written about spirituality, African spirituality. What are some of the rituals that you engage in on a day-to-day basis? And I know that we've talked about this before, the fact that this is a very personal kind of thing, but we need models today. And if we don't present them, the people won't have anything to base anything on.
All right, I know that was abrupt, but that was around the time. I think I went over just a little bit, Brother Damani. I think you told me 33 minutes and 15 seconds. So I think that's.
Yes, that was fine.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we open up for comments. Y'all have any anybody have any comments, anything they'd like to say?
What was her answer to that question? I was on pins and needles trying to figure out what she was going to say next.
What was the question?
About her spiritual practice. What does she use?
You want to go?
She went on. She went on to talk about Kwanzaa, talk about her and her daughter pour libations.
Okay.
Another thing, real fast, that we do. We practice ancestral communion all the time. We just don't recognize on Black History Month, February. That's really ancestral communion month. January 15th, Martin Luther King birthday, ancestral communion month. May 19th, Malcolm X's birthday, ancestral communion. August 17th, Marcus Garvey, ancestral communion. So she's gonna get into some of the altars and pouring libations, some of the practice she do.
Okay.
Can I share a couple of pictures? Because when she was talking and she was asking Lesterfield Middleton, so I saw this movie a long time ago. Maybe some of you saw it. Oh, that didn't come out so good, but this was Cooley High. And there's Lawrence Hilton Jacob and Glenn Turman and others. And they said, this is for the brothers that ain't here. And they also did, let's see, maybe this picture will come out clearer. Yeah. And people do that to this day. May not know it's an African thing, but they know that they're connecting to those that are not here. And if I can get personal just for a minute, this is my altar, and I have relatives and my crystals. And somebody gave me this skull. These elephants were my grandmothers on my father's side, and somebody gave me this ancestor here. So that's my personal altar.
More crystals than the Catholic Church, Emo.
I started collecting them in like 1983.
Well, Imholt, the brother that just recently passed, he was really into crystals.
Yes, Nuru. Yeah, Brother
Nuru. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Sure was. Yep. All right, Brother Damani, do you want to go on to the next video, the next part? If unless there's some other, unless somebody else would like to say something, I'm glad. Hey, Sanana V.S. Chochese has joined us. All right.
Greetings, greetings.
Sister Akanke, Keisha. All right. And Jasmine, glad you all could join us. Mike Westbrook is with us as well, and all of you that are still hanging with us. Very good information, a very good way to think of things that we do. And we appreciate Damani pausing us to look at these things. Damani, you want me to go to the next video, or what would you like?
Yeah, real fast. Y'all pay close attention to the first 5 minutes. Anyway, that's it. Yeah, you can start. The next one, 19 and a half minutes, right?
Okay. All right.
I've worked out some things that I want to share with you, and I want your patience, and I hope your interest. It's a topic which I don't think is treated seriously enough, and with system and with method, and that's what I'm attempting to do this evening. But it's going to take energy on my part and on your part. I think it'll be worth it. Pardon me? Do I have to? African spiritual thought in its own terms. Okay. Many of us are practicing other religions because we need something. That's a human need. That's an African need. And we're doing this because no one has ever presented African religion to us in terms of the underlying philosophy that the religion is based on. That is, no coherent statement has been made to us about African religion, and it hasn't been explained in terms of the African worldview. Usually it's explained with reference to somebody else's worldview. So I want to attempt to correct that this evening, and then we can get hopefully into questions. But I want to lead slowly into it, because I think first we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by terms that we use all the time, but there may be some confusion about them. I like to make a distinction sometimes between religion and spirituality, because I think that these two terms can be used in different ways. When we define religion in an Afrocentric context, we are talking about a spiritual philosophy which permeates or fills our entire existence, our entire personal and cultural existence. It's a spiritual ideology, a spiritual philosophy. Now, by spirituality, in an African context, we're talking about the place of the sacred in African life. By religion, unfortunately, usually in a European context, we are emphasizing an institution, emphasizing documentation, dogma, whatever, but it's separated from other aspects of our lives. Okay, that tends to be the way in which we use religion ordinarily when we speak in a Western context, but that's not going to be the meaning that we're going to be using tonight. Now what I want to do is to ask and answer another question, and that is, well, why do you need a spiritual philosophy? Why do you need a religion? All peoples have always created spiritual concepts. Why? And I want to answer it in terms of what it is that a spiritual philosophy should do for us. First of all, it presents to us our values as imperatives. That is, it says to us that we don't have a choice but to act in a certain way. It's not like we're choosing to do that, but something is saying, you have to do that. That's the way you have to be. That's the way you have to act, because that's the right way to do it. And that's what your spiritual philosophy or your religion does for you. It also, at the same time, a part of that is that it sanctions the culture. Therefore, your spiritual philosophy is particular and not universal. Now, I know this may sound strange and be an unpopular position, but I think it's accurate. That is, that my goddesses, gods, spirits, orisha, energies, forces, beliefs, speak to me in a very special way. That is, they say something about my special experience. And me, in this context, is we. It is the collective. Why? Because we are African. And that is what me means when we are African. Very important to keep in mind. Secondly, our spiritual thought, or religious practice, if you will, must put our behavior, our actions, in tune with what we perceive to be a deeper, higher, ultimate truth. Okay? In tune with an eternal reality, what we perceive to be an eternal reality. On the other hand, we always have the circle. It always comes back the other way. Our spiritual conceptions should be able to bring divine truth closer to us. That is, it should be able to bring divine truth onto the plane of human existence and human reality. Another thing that happens through a spiritual philosophy is that it gives us a spiritual awareness, a sense of order that we use to defeat the chaos that we experience around us. Confusion, crisis. We know there are many times in our lives where we experience crisis. Death of somebody close to us. What we perceive to be as failure can bring crisis into our lives. Financial crisis, or the loss of a friendship. You can think of other examples. But these are times when we lose our way because everything seems to be going wrong. We don't have the answers anymore. Okay? It's difficult for us to determine which is the right way to go. What's the correct thing to do? We lose our way. What our spiritual ideology does for us, or should do for us, is that it should provide a systematic way of thinking, which in the first place acts to prevent this breakdown that we experience. But then if we do experience a breakdown or a crisis, it enables us to regain vision, to reestablish a feeling of hope and clarity and direction. It also should relieve suffering for us. This is why we need spiritual conceptions. And we all are going to have suffering, some time of suffering in our lives. It should help to make that suffering bearable. Another thing that our religious or our spiritual philosophy should do is that it should provide us with a system of symbols. And those symbols become powerful symbols because they create in us feelings which have such energy that it can motivate us to do special things. That is, they become a basis for commitment. And that commitment leads to fulfillment, to a sense of fulfillment. So that our sacred symbols presented to us by our spiritual philosophy or ideology presents our culture, our history, our values, our beliefs, and our identity to us in a very special way. And the way in which all of this is presented to us causes us to love them, to honor them, and to revere them. The things that I'm mentioning now, I'd like you to keep in mind so that as we talk specifically about ancestor communion, we can go back and see, well, how do they relate to these things? Which religion, if you want to call it that, or spiritual philosophy should do. Another thing that it should do is that it should allow us to achieve continuity of meaning. That is, by transcending, that is, moving beyond the finite moral existence that we experience as human beings, we are able to be put in touch with, let's say, the eternal aspect of the universe, or the eternal aspect of ourselves. And that's the same thing. The eternal aspect of the universe and the eternal aspect of ourselves, they are one. And I'll explain that later. Well, I wanted to give some examples from specific African philosophies. I think I might try to hold off on that, because if I do that, it's going to take me too long. But we can do it later. Now, another thing that a spiritual philosophy should do, and that is that the goals that it presents should not be separate from our political goals as a people. Now, that may be a very controversial point, but for me it is absolutely essential. Now, if these goals were separate, then that could cause conflict. That is, it could lead to conflicting commitments. We're talking, after all, about commitment. We're talking about the deepest kind of commitment that human beings can feel. Okay, so that these two areas, I'm saying, should be compatible, and I'm saying more, they should be one. And I hope to show you how that can happen. Your spiritual philosophy should reaffirm your existence. Your existence. We define ourselves collectively as Africans. So the philosophy has got to reaffirm our existence and our definition as a people, as a family, as a community, and as a nation. If a religion or a spiritual philosophy does not affirm your existence as a cultural being, then it is inadequate. It is not working properly for you. If a religion contradicts your cultural identity and seeks to separate you from your culture by denying that culture, then it's not right for you. And lastly, a religion or a spiritual philosophy must build a national consciousness. That's what religion does. And we've got to understand that. Now what I want to do is to look generally at African philosophy in general. Because African philosophy itself is a spiritual philosophy. Okay, so we're looking at the African worldview, seeing some of the characteristics. How does it work? It already implies a spiritual function because it is spiritual in nature. That's number one, okay? And as I speak, always think in terms of a circle. To understand African conceptions, always remember the circle. The circle will keep coming back. To begin with, the African worldview or African philosophy is characterized by the idea of a unified spiritual totality, a unified whole, in which all being is interrelated. So it's unity and wholeness. This becomes a basic conception. And the universe is perceived as being made up of interacting forces, which, you know, they act on each other, but it's within an unchanging whole. The universe is perceived as being made up of changing rhythms, but within one cosmic rhythmic order, okay? One rhythm is the whole, one rhythm is the cosmos. But within that, we have rhythms and forces which work on each other and with each other. There is also the African concept of the universal life force. Only one universal life force. Quiet as it's kept, you hear about polytheism and, you know, all of these things. All African people believe in one universal life force. And I will not call that monotheism, by the way, and maybe I can talk about that later, why I won't. Now, this life force energizes all being. It animates the universe, and it connects all being. Another characteristic of the worldview. We believe in the sacredness of the cosmos. And by the way, when we use the word cosmos as opposed to using universe, really the same thing, but cosmos implies interrelationship, okay, and that's important, that everything in the universe is related to everything else, okay, so in one sense it is all one in a very important sense, okay, so we believe in a sacred cosmos, the creation of which was a divine act. Therefore, to know the origin of the cosmos is to know divinity. To be in touch with the cosmos is to be in touch with divinity. Another characteristics. Human beings are primarily spiritual. They are physical, but the most important part of them is spiritual. Human beings have a special relationship to the universal life force. They can activate and harness this force and use this force. And we use terms like Ashe, Nyama, Nomo. These are terms which indicate the ability that we have as human beings to use the life force. This indicates the will that we have as human beings, the conscious will that we have to act on other things, other beings in the universe. Now, because we have this special relationship to the universal life force, we therefore have a special responsibility. And what happens in this view is that spirituality becomes the basis for morality. And therefore, the misuse of this power is punished. Another characteristic is that spirit and matter are joined.
All right. Brother Damani, would you like to take over at this point? I'll set it up for the next part. It's 6:19 right now. I don't think Women of Wose are meeting after us, and so let's go over a little bit. If you have time, if you can stay with us, We generally end at 6:30, 9:30 for some of you, and 8:30 for others. You know, because we have about 6 more minutes of this presentation that she's giving to discuss, but let's open it up for whatever discussion Brother Damani would like.
Oh, I'd just like to say one or two things. She talked about worldview, and in her book, Let the Circle Be Broken, the reason we have a worldview and must understand a worldview, which African worldview is a unified spiritual whole. We're connected to each other and the universe. We have a holistic perception of reality that focuses on spirit and the God within. We live in a culture that worldview is the exact opposite. The worldview of the culture we live in is that we are individual beings instead of spiritual beings. We are disconnected from each other instead of connected from each other. We're connected. We are disconnected from the universe. The Europeans have a linear perception of reality. Death is final. We didn't believe that nothing. And they focus on materialism and the God outside of them. The Africans focus on spirit and the God within. So you can see the difference in the worldview and what this worldview has created. So I encourage everybody. That video we're watching is 2 hours long, and the first one we didn't finish either. So you can on your own time you can go back and watch these clips. I don't know if we had time, but she's going to get into the first part real fast. She talked about dichotomization. She talks about the European perception of reality is a dichotomized perception of reality. That is a split. They split everything. They split spirit from matter. They split emotions from reason, reason from emotions. They are the reasonable ones. We are the emotional ones. So the reasonable ones got to dominate the emotional ones. They split male and female, mind and body, practices and belief. They believe one thing but practice another. That's what the Europeans, the mind and body, cause and effect. You know, you go to the hospital, they deal with the effect, not the cause. Beliefs in action, they split everything. They split problems and policies. They split the problems around the country from the policies they created. You know, they split medicine from food. We all know that your food is your medicine. But anyway, that's enough out of me. One more thing, she said, without a spiritual philosophy that creates continuity. The reason you have a spiritual philosophy, because human beings cannot function in chaos. So we must have continuity on the spiritual philosophy and a worldview, because we can't function in chaos. And that's enough out of me. Anyway, anybody else speak up?
You know, Brother Damani, when we're brought over here in the darkness of the bottom of those ships, and when we come out, they give us these glasses with the lenses turned upside down. And that helps to perpetuate all of the division that you were just speaking of. We don't see things the same way. We're not connected. You know, when the brother did the thing with pitting the old against the young, see, all that's part of that dichotomy you're talking about right there. You know, so it was infused into our thinking that we've got to compete.
Right.
We begin to assimilate.
Thank you.
Brother Monty?
Oh,
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I watched the full 2.5 hours, and it is very powerful. This young lady really pulls together the whole meaning of religion which we have been imposed upon us by something called Christianity versus spirituality, which connects us with our land, our history, and our culture. Later on, she does an excellent job of drawing the circles that are unbroken to show the connection with the universe, with our elders, with our middle-aged people, with our youth, and it is a circle unbroken. I don't know if you're going to go that far, but I watched it the last couple of days. I would strongly recommend it. Last but not least, she really emphasizes that this whole issue of religion is political, it is not spiritual. And that is something that we must study carefully and remember, because the spirituality is what we need to strive for, regardless of all the religious learnings that have been thrust at us. We still can move towards that spirituality and get beyond the Christianity political positions that it takes. Thank you for bringing this in.
Thank you. Real fast, on the opening page of her book, Let the Circle Be Unbroken, she talks about how we are the best Christians. Whatever religion Black people are practicing, they practice the essence of the religion. They don't separate beliefs and practice. So we are the best Christians also. Any more comments?
I just wanted to share, Hetep, everyone, that the African spirituality, the symbol of the circle, the babies that have been born have come forth from the ancestors, and the elders and those who pass on into from this physical representation are returning to the ancestors. So it's a constant movement of communion, constant. It never is. It's never broken, never. And in Christian thinking, it is blasphemous the word they use is divination. And in divination, when you recognize those who have a part of you have entered the spirit world, you are divining, and it's blasphemous. And so in our spiritual thinking, it constantly keeps us in contact with the words of my father and my father's father and my mother and my mother's mother. And it comes down to the fact, I believe what my mama said, and I believe what my father said, and I stand on their shoulders. Ashe.
Ashe.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Sarita. Yes, that's what the book is all about. Let the circle be unbroken. And right, you're right. We are ancestors. We come back. When a new child was born in the town or the village, the elders got together and trying to figure out who came back. Right, so we do come back. Any more comments?
I'd like to thank you for presenting Sistani to us. I had seen her name flash different times and different readings, but it's first opportunity to get a more of an in-depth look at her and see where she's coming from. Now, in her book, Urugu, is the whole book around that concept, or is she dealing with other things as well? Because and maybe somebody can just explain that concept, Urugu. My understanding of it is that it reflects a incomplete being that's primarily negative. And that's very fitting for people that we're aware of. So how much time does she spend in nailing that down?
You're referring to the book Yarugu? This book?
Yeah, right.
Oh, wow, this is a deep book. It's hard to
That-
explain it in a nutshell. But Yarugu is a Dugon word for being who bring disorder to the universe,
Right.
Yes.
who is missing their twin soul. She talks about Amma, and they just post themselves before they anyway, they don't have a twin soul, a spiritual side. All right. And this book is about critiquing European culture, thought, and behavior. It is heavy. It's 500 some pages. And she goes into well, she explains that when she was in the university and the academy, that all the anthropologists were studying everybody else. They were studying other cultures and other people. Dr. Marimba looked at her white anthropologist and said, I'm going to study you.
Good for her.
And that's
Good
what
for her.
it's about.
Yeah, it reminds me so much of Dr. Wilson in that regard.
Right.
That book is it's like a Neely Fuller. I mean, because she really goes. You probably want to tackle that one in a group setting because it's really heavy.
Yes.
Sounds like it's a pretty thick book. If it's 500 pages, it's pretty thick.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Real fast, she's critiquing European thought using Dugon word. The first word she used is silly. The silly is the DNA of the culture, the germ seed of the culture. Yeah, the DNA of the culture, and she identifies European culture as they're seeking power. Everything they do is for the furtherance of European power. And so the culture is all about power over others. And that's the first concept. Then she goes into Plato, but I can't get into it right now, it'd take too long.
Yeah.
But she goes in, she uses different Dugon words to explain everything. Yes.
Okay, I'll have to look for a copy.
Yeah, I'm surprised you ain't got a copy.
I don't have a copy of it.
All right, any more comments?
You know, I just want to say this is really a lively discussion. I like what has been said, and I don't know if you all have gotten a chance to read some of the comments that are in the chat, and people are appreciative of this information and agree with many of the things that she mentions. So I just wanted to add that as well. Right. So I'm going to start it again where Brother Damani would like us to begin, and we have about 6 more minutes to watch this, and then we're going to come back for discussion and then close. All right. Where'd you go?
To get right into the concept of ancestor communion. So what I've tried to do is to lay a basis for understanding this concept, and I want to take it step by step and talk about how it works, what its significance is. As I talk, always remember the circle. What ancestor communion does, for one thing, is that it places the relationship between a person and her community, a person and her family, into a sacred context. That is, those realities of family, community, nation, and so forth are placed into a spiritual context. The community and the culture are perceived as being sacred in origin. Another thing that we have to understand is that meaning, human meaning, that which is valuable to us, necessarily transcends or goes beyond the visual, the literal, the material, and the ordinary. It has to. We cannot understand the depth of meaning in life for us using a materialistic worldview. Okay? And it's saying that the most meaningful reality for us is a spiritual reality. Okay? Now, that is not to be spooky. I was giving this lecture recently, and this brother said to me, you know, I never use that word spiritual because I just don't know what people could be talking about. And I thought about that later, and I said, you know, as an African, as a person of African descent, you know, that brother is saying, I've never loved anybody. You know, I've never experienced that. Because if he had, then he'd know that's a spiritual experience. And that's all I'm talking about. You see? Which cannot be limited to material reality. You can't even talk about it in the same kind of terms that you talk about ordinary reality. And I'm going to take a second to give an example, which I gave in one of my classes. When we were talking about African concepts of time, there's a line from a song which says, I love you in a space which has no place or time.
Mm-hmm.
I just want you to think about what is being said there. Then I had another one. Oh, yes, the other one was, time is the space between you and me. And what I do in my classes is use these are from ordinary songs that we have known, and get people to think about, well, what does that mean? What was that sister talking about when she said that? What was that brother talking about? What was he trying to express? Okay, so what we're saying is that we've got to move to another level in order to even understand these concepts. Another important idea that has to do with ancestor communion is that of spiritual continuity. That is essential. As an African people, the members of a community must always be in touch with each other and must always be in touch with the source. The community, therefore, is whole when they are somehow spiritually in touch with each other. That's what makes us a community. Otherwise, we're not a community. The community must be whole so that we can share spirit, so that we can indeed commune with one another. People don't look at that word, community. That's what it means, is that you commune. And commune means a joining, a spiritual joining. Another important part of the concept of ancestor communion is that the idea of community itself transcends ordinary time and space, and that is why you will hear people say, or you will see it written, that the African community is made up of the dead, the living, and the yet unborn. I'm sure that you have heard that. All of those words we have to put in quotes, because we're not really talking about the dead. We're not really talking about differences in being, but we will get to that. So that the living would respond to the present, in quotes, right? The dead would be the past, in quotes, and please keep it in quotes, and the yet unborn would be the future. All of that makes up the African community. That's what ancestor communion says. It says without any part of that, it's not whole. And it's got to be whole. The community always has to be whole, always has to be in touch. When the physical body exists no longer, spiritual life continues. That is a basic African conception and the basis of ancestor communion. The essence of the human being is spiritual.
All right. Gave you a little teaser because that's a lot of information that she has given us. Brother Damani, would you like to give us a sum us up?
What? Oh, let me see. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed it. There's a lot more to those videos. She goes into the educational system, how children are de-Africanized in the education system. On the first video we showed, how children say, "You don't speak correctly. Who don't speak like that. Don't talk like that." They're being de-Africanized. They're speaking the way their culture speaks, and so she goes into a lot more stuff. And this video, the one we're watching, is 2 hours long. So she goes into a lot more information. Talk about Naeem Akbar. He used the word "ba" on the first. I think that was on this clip here. We cut it off at 19 minutes and started back over at 31 minutes. But she goes in, and Naeem Akbar says something important about the ba, the ba. In African philosophy, the ba represent. We say the ba represent the spirit. Naeem Akbar say the ba represent the divine within us. And so whenever you see the image of the bird, like at Sister Karen's memorial, at the end we showed the bird flying through the air. The bird in African culture represents a spiritual journey. So you see Haru, the hawk-headed Haru, that represented the spiritual journey. You know, the bird represents a spiritual journey. And if you understand one day we got to talk about Horm Hackett, Haru on the horizon, which the Greeks named the Sphinx. This is really the whole, it's deep. Horm Hackett, when the Pharaoh, or the Nisbet, I can't pronounce the word, Nisbet passed away, he become Horus. He gets on the solar bark and travels through the Milky Way to meet up with his father, who art in heaven, to meet up with Assad, become a living God. So all these concepts created all the other religions of the world, philosophical systems of the world. Anyway, that's enough out of me. Anybody else got some comments? I thank you all for joining.
I thought that was great. I think if you read in the comments, the chats, people are very appreciative of you presenting this information, Brother Damani. And your family members are here. We're so happy that they joined us today. And you see Sister Zarita, she's sending up hearts. And
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Damani, when she talks about spiritual continuity or spiritual philosophy, does that also involve helping each other out in the community?
Yes. Yes, that's definitely a part of it, helping each other out. We're supposed to help each other. We're supposed to work together. Yes, if me and Brother Yusuf went to Africa, and the children calling us uncles, and so we are a family. What she's really saying, we are one. We are family. We are unified, and we've been despiritualized, so we are really one. And yes, and we should definitely help each other, and all of us do that in our own way, help each other out in the community. But yes, we got to get back to that.
What's the purpose of you pouring libations every morning? You mentioned several times a day.
Well, the purpose was to invoke the ancestors to come and be with me, to walk with me, talk with me. At Rose, we say, I'm never alone. I have 1,000 ancestors on each side of me, behind me, on each side of me, darling. And so that's one of the reasons we pour libations, to invite the ancestors. You said when the brothers poured, before we open the African ceremony, we always invite the ancestors. We're not whole without the ancestors. So I'm not whole without the ancestors. So when I pour libations, it's symbolically saying, I'm inviting the ancestors in to walk with me, talk with me, guide me, and all that stuff.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to put in the chat, great question, Sister Darlene. I'm going to put in the chat, there is so she launched a new edition. an expanded edition to her book, and there's a question and answer that YouTube that I just put in the chat for you all to check out. Looks like something we would do here in Oakland and Sacramento, wherever African Americans are. And I'd like to close with a video of libation. Brother Damani, thank you so much. Tomorrow, we're not going to have study of sacred scriptures. You know, it's a holiday. People are, I don't know what they're doing, but, you know, all I know is I'm not going to do it. But, you know,
You know what they're doing.
I'm not going to tell you what to do, you know, because we're not that kind of church. Brother Damani, do you know if Dr. Ani is still teaching? That's a question that just came up. And if so, where? Do you know? Do you happen to know?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I was wondering about that this morning. I don't know. I had to look into that. Those clips was 35 years old. She did those clips back in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Ani is in her close to 70 or in her 70s now. But I'm quite sure she's retired by now. But she taught at professor at Hunter College with Dr. John Henry Clark. Taught at Hunter College in Puerto Rican and African studies. But she's still active in the community, and hopefully we can bring her to Sacramento. And
you know, when I saw that Hunter College, you know who else taught there was Dr. Leonard Jeffries.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, so she was in great company. There's a lot going on at Hunter College.
yes.
Isn't that where they were attacking him on his tenure, Dr. Leonard Jeffries? He had
Yes,
to fight that case.
yes, yes.
Yes. Okay.
No, that was in New York. That was in New York
Oh, that's
City.
right. That's right. It was
Okay,
New York City College. That's right.
Got you.
All right.
In Motel,
Yes, yes. Mhm.
will there be a first Friday?
There will not be a first Friday until September. Thank you for asking that question. Sugar D thought it would be best to wait until September to start a first Friday, and I'm looking forward to that. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay, we're pouring libation as we go out. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Life, prosperity, and health to everyone.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Well done. Well done. Good job, Damani.
Well done.
Yes, well done. Well done, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Well, Brother Harry, I know y'all call him Damani. I always call him Harry. I called his house one day. I said, "Man, I speak to Harry." They said, "You have the wrong number." So I had to call back and say, "Man, I speak to Damani." But a very good presentation. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I'd like to know more about African communion. And yeah, it was all right. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All
All
right.
right. We'll be talking, my brother.
All right.
You guys look a little alike.
They're twins. They're twins.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know. All right. Love to each and everyone. Glad to see you all. Be careful tomorrow. Watch out. People are crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
Peace.